Today we're going to talk about big companies that made big mistakes and lived to tell about them. Well, they probably don't want to talk about them, but I do. Specifically, we're going to talk about some of the biggest product launches in history that turned out to be huge failures. Now, the reason I'm going to talk about these cases is not to rub salt in anyone's wounds, but to serve as lessons learned. So let's get started. Number 1, the Ford Edsel. This one is a classic story told in marketing textbooks and especially in the automotive world. The year was 1957. Ford's management decided that they needed to add another brand to their family, which at the time consisted of Ford, Mercury, and Lincoln. Ford invested over $4 billion in today's dollars to create a new vehicle that they did not bother to research whether or not the market would want it before taking this giant leap of faith. Well, that turned out to be a huge mistake, and the market told them so, but not before Ford had invested in establishing dedicated Edsel dealerships around the country and putting out a massive advertising campaign, including a primetime TV special. Problems with these cars range from confusing pricing in relation to the existing Ford brands, awkward styling, and quality problems with some of the new features that were being introduced in these cars. The Edsel division lasted for only 3 model years before it was ultimately shut down. Number 2, the Apple Message Pad. Most of us know Apple to be a massively successful computer and electronics company, famous for its iPhones, Macintosh computers, and other amazing electronic gadgets. However, Apple also has a closet full of infamous product failures that they would prefer no one ever mentions again. Well, I'm going to mention one of them that seemed like a cutting-edge product at the time of its introduction back in 1993. The Newton Message Pad was a tablet-like device about the size of a paperback book, and it was a pretty amazing product, at least in theory. It was an electronic organizer possessing all the key features that we now take for granted on such devices, such as a calendar, note-taking ability, a calculator, and so on. Its major problem was that the technology that it claimed to offer, mainly centering around handwriting recognition, was half-baked. For the price Apple was charging for it back then, close to $1,000, it just didn't live up to the hype the company was placing behind it. Still, the Message Pad lasted about 5 years on the market before it was finally discontinued. Of course, Apple used the lessons it learned from releasing this unsuccessful product to help it develop the iPod, iPhone, and iPad, which went on to become massive successes for the company. Number 3, New Coke. You know, Coke, the soda. The original Coca-Cola was introduced in 1886. Almost 100 years later, Coca-Cola's dominant market position was being eroded by the more highly sweetened Pepsi-Cola. The management at Coca-Cola decided that the answer to this was to change the formula for Coke, a formula that had remained the same for almost 100 years. They decided to change it to closely match that of Pepsi-Cola. According to Coca-Cola, their market research, which included blind taste tests and consumer surveys, told them that this was a good idea. When the new version of Coke was first launched in April of 1985, with massive fanfare, it initially did sell better than the original version. However, it wasn't very long before a huge backlash erupted against the company's decision to change the formula. The backlash originated from only a small segment of consumers, but it spread quickly and began capturing news headlines everywhere. It turned out that some of the original taste test participants who did not like the proposed change had very strong feelings about it. And looking back, this was probably a sign of what the overall market reaction would be when the product was introduced to the general public. Even though the majority of consumers liked the new Coke, the minority who didn't were very vocal about it. Less than 3 months after the new Coke was introduced, the company announced that they would be reverting to the original formula. Lesson learned: don't mess with 100 years of success. Did you notice the 2 common factors between these 3 examples? Number 1, all 3 of these companies have reputations for being very well managed and never making bad business decisions. But the truth is, just like people, we all make mistakes, and sometimes they're big ones. Number 2, good market research is absolutely crucial for all new products. It can literally make or break a new product, sometimes on a massive scale. These companies all survived the product failures I talked about and went on to thrive afterwards. But I'll bet you they would have much preferred to not have gone through these expensive and painful learning lessons if they could. What these examples tell me is that investing in good market research actually saves you money in the long run. Do you think these companies would agree?